This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
I'd like to call September 12th meeting, Board of Finance order. First item on our agenda, minutes of our regular meeting on August 15th. Everyone's had a chance to look at them. Any questions or comments? Can I have a motion to approve them as presented?
I'd like to make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Old business, we really have none. New business, expenditures?
You have a question, Ed, on
Yep.
page 9, the vehicle maintenance and repair, why is it a negative?
Is that under police?
Yeah,
Right, because police does a lot of special jobs where they charge for the use of the vehicle has to stay running, so that's above and beyond their normal work. And we bill for it and collect for it, so some of that money goes in that account to offset it, because it's above and beyond normal use.
It doesn't go to the outside duty that we have on the report?
That would be the pay. This is the actual, we get charged for the vehicle as well.
Oh, we charge for the vehicle too?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
We roll it out there and we get
Yeah.
paid so much an hour.
Right. Okay.
okay, thank you.
Ed, I guess the reserve accrued, I mean, obviously I know it's an estimate, right, so that's why we're over there? We must have settled some contracts?
No, Tim, that was for 2 or 3 people that retired,
Oh,
and that's
okay.
a settlement of their time that we owe them for vacation and sick time.
Okay.
But we can't control when they retire, so some years it's high, some years it's not.
Is this part of the SRO transfer?
No, this has nothing to do with, no. Well, they might have been a police officer,
Yes.
yeah.
Transportation and hauling, we're saying was storm related.
That's the tornado debris. We have the outside contractor
Page
handle
12.
that.
Anything else?
Well, will we have a separate revenue line for FEMA money if it comes in?
It'll go under other revenue.
Yeah, there's always been in the budget, a line for FEMA, if we get any money in.
Yeah.
Well, we will, because I met with the fire chief, we had to attend an opening event, the kickoff meeting with them last week, so that's just getting going, so that'll probably take a few months before anything happens.
I guess my question is, will all storm-related expenses be within or seen to us on this budget, or will it be separately budgeted with FEMA money?
No, they're in the,
As a special account almost?
no, they're not a special account, they're just part of various line items, public works, overtime, tree
Yeah.
work.
Okay.
Because we haven't been guaranteed payment on any of it. We're just submitting it and seeing what the reimbursement would be, if any.
Right, generally it's 75% of it.
Okay, Michael?
I have some additional questions
Sure.
on expenses. On page 7, the consultant software within information technology, I see that it's been listed here as an encumbrance, and I just want to know, especially with regard to the Board of Ed, when do you choose to use encumbrances, since most of the items within the budget that have to do with labor or outside subcontractors are anticipated expenses?
Well, Mike, on our side, I'm not going to speak for the Board of Ed, but what we will do is, as soon as we put something out to bid, or we enter into a contract, then we have a commitment. And once I have a commitment, I encumber it, so
Okay.
that I know I've got that much money tied up with one vendor or one company, and that's how we set them up. And
Yeah.
then when they're paid, we relieve the encumbrance and then charge it to expense.
Right. Well, my problem on the Board of Ed side is they use it so much and so liberally that we can't accurately track their expenses on a month-to-month basis.
Yeah, understood.
I agree with them. That actually came up a little bit amongst us before you arrived, because Pat and I were saying the same thing.
Yeah. Very good. On, I believe it's page 10 here, I just, now what is the separate expense for EMT under fire? I know about EMT training, but EMTs, I was...
It's their stipend, isn't it?
Yes,
It's a stipend they receive.
yeah.
So they get paid a lump sum up front? So the whole.
Most likely in July, yeah. A lot of the contracts have it where it's done up front. Like when we pay the HSAs, they're done in July.
I wish we had some footnotes on
Well-
some of this stuff. In July.
Only so much can fit on the line.
Yeah, but all these expenses for the EMT were incurred in July, which
Yeah.
is by contract. There's nothing for August.
You got something else,
And that's
Michael?
for the year, obviously, then.
For a year.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna run over on this
Is
item.
it 6,000?
Yeah.
I think it's 6,000
What's that for?
a person.
Is that what it is?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's all that I had. On
Anyone
other
else
expenses.
on expenditures? Revenue?
Revenue.
Ed, just one question. Why are
Sure.
we so high in short-term investment? We had a big month, actually.
Oh, and revenue?
Yeah.
Well, in July, all the tax money comes in, so,
I thought that, actually,
Yeah,
but
so that was a
it
big-
still seems high.
and I think one of the banks, Webster, the rate was pretty favorable, so we just moved more money into one of the funds.
Anything else on revenue?
The only question I had on the building fees is, you know, I didn't look to see how much of the Amazon building fees we received last year. Are Amazon building fees capped at 1 million? Was that part of the agreement? Was there a cap or a max on that?
No, it was a 50% reduction off of what the fees would have been. We had anticipated it would be, based on the value of the project, an aggregate amount of 2 million, but the 50% reduction would have yielded 1 million, which is $1 million more than we had if Amazon didn't come
Yeah,
in.
certainly.
But a check came in for roughly 1.4 million for Amazon,
But that was mostly fire inspection fees.
building
is that-
and fire.
Right. So where do we stand with the Amazon building fees? How much was paid in under the building category last year?
You'd have to find it. I don't
I'd
think
have
you know
to
that.
go
You'll
back
find
and
it.
check.
Well, all right, I thought it might be a number that might stick in your head, a big number.
Got a lot of numbers to think about.
Okay, all right, so we don't know what to make of the 216,000 that came in this previous month. Okay.
Well, that's year-to-date, that's 2 months, the 216.
This month was 127.
Yeah.
So let me just give you some perspective, Michael, on this. We used to average about $800,000 to $850,000 in building permit fees. Last year, the number that sticks out in my mind Ed, is like $1,850,000 that we brought in, which was $1 million more than what our normal average was. So with all these projects I have going on in economic development, you're going to see a sustained level of building permit fees. And you're also going to see projects like Amazon with more fees coming in because there's going to be things like solar panels being installed, which will create a separate fee. There will be racking systems, electrical work being done, which will be more fees coming in.
Yeah.
Clintonville Manor, this project I have going on over there. So you're going to see a sustained level of building permit fees come in. So these fees represent an incremental amount of money that we'll be receiving versus what history has been here in North Haven in terms of what we've been generating.
Yeah. Again, for us to understand, you know, the cash flow in that category, we would have to know things such as whether Amazon wants to pay all their building fees up front
You have to
for
pay
all
them.
aspects, but for all aspects of construction, or whether they're doing it incrementally
No, Amazon-
with each trade or each stage of construction.
That's exactly it. Amazon doesn't pay all the fees himself direct. The electrician will pull his permits, the plumber will pull his permits. The supplemental electrician that's wiring all these robotic equipment, he'll pull his fee separate.
Right.
So it'll just be a series of smaller fees in addition to the building fee itself for construction. So, yeah, everyone has to pull their own little permits.
Okay. It's just, we don't really know the status of that category at this time, but it may be clear as the year progresses.
Anything else on revenue? Special funds?
Had the large expense in recreation for August, is that some kind of summer payroll? What was that?
I think I moved the prepaid expense from last year and just charged it off. Because a lot of these funds, I don't do month-to-month prepaid and accrual, so
Right.
it just gets charged off once.
If we're good on special funds, Board of Ed?
Well, we can't really do anything with the Board of Ed because everything's encumbered.
I know.
And we don't have our detailed reports because there's a new person trying to learn the ropes, so
Right.
I think it's kind of hard for us to look at it right now.
Luckily, we're early in the year. Can we give him maybe a few months and ask him?
Yeah, right now I've been trying to work
Yeah.
on a few issues with them at the moment, but
Maybe
I'm sure that's not gonna happen right now.
Maybe-
Down the road, yeah.
Maybe in a couple months, ask him if he can provide us additional information. Not encumber everything, show us the month expenditures. Anything else on Board of Ed?
We, for the time being, we should expect this single report only until the new business. Now, the new business manager, what stage is that in?
He started,
Oh, so there's no more interim?
no,
I thought he was
Well,
probational.
but I think his name was Frank Connolly, was the interim. He's still, I think he's still there helping out.
He's helping out.
Yeah, and Jason Lathrop has become the new business manager over there.
So look, Ed's done a great job in communicating with both Frank and Jason, and he's been working with them to explain what we really want to see here in the Board of Finance. We're going to be meeting, we think, in October. I'll be at that meeting with Ed and the new finance director with Dr. Cronin, and our goal is to basically have him understand what we need and have them comply with what we're looking for here. That's the goal.
What was Jason's last name?
Lathrop.
Lathrop.
And Ed, do you know what Jason's experience is, where he's from?
I know he's worked at a few different school systems, but I think one of them was, I want to say, up there Plainfield, Jewett City, I want to say. I think he worked in East Haven and a few other places.
Well, I hope that you, in any communication with them, you pass along the questions that Tim Dehaney had in the last meeting about the grant report, where we did not understand when items were received or whether they received in the anticipated amounts and their employment and usage, whether it be over or under those separate budgeted expectations. So I think some of Tim's questions were spot on, and I hope that in some form of future reporting that these issues become more clear to us.
Do you know whether he has grant experience?
Yeah, he said he did. He said he liked working on grants today when I was working with him, so.
Like state, federal, private, do you know?
But would they be federal and state? That's what Board of Ed's usually receive.
And Dr. Cronin is on till when?
December 31st.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Maybe sometime in November, you, I, and Michael maybe should meet Jason and just remind him of the format we're looking at when the budget cycle starts again.
Yeah, actually, one of the items we were working on was trying to move some of the stuff that was charged to the general fund to the grants where it really belonged. So that's a big help in itself.
Okay. Anything else on Board of Ed? Can I have a motion to accept the reports as presented?
Make a motion?
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We have two resolutions. Mike, would you like to take us through the first one, open space acquisition, or would you, is there any
just read this.
let me read the resolution. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends that the town of North Haven appropriate $500,000 for the acquisition of and improvements to one or more parcel of land for preservation as open space. Such one or more parcel of land, including terms and conditions, shall be determined by the Board of Selectmen pursuant to Town Charter Section 406. The appropriation may be spent for acquisition costs preliminary thereto, including without limitation, survey fees, testing, engineering, and other consultant fees feasibility and planning studies related to potential acquisition, cleanup and remediation, grant management and other administrative costs, legal fees, net temporary interest and other financial costs, and other expenses related to the acquisition and to their finance, and to the town issue bonds or notes and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $500,000 to finance the appropriation. Discussion. Would you,
I have a question.
go ahead, Pat?
I saw an email where there might be some problem with the land associated or near Peters Rock.
So Pat, the problem is we've made an offer, and the offer includes the asking price less the cost of what it would cost us to tear the building down. There's a building on that site that the property owner owns that is in disrepair and decay. So what we're not going to do is pay for the property price that they would like, and then pay secondly to tear the building down and do the remediation. So there's a chance that they won't accept it, our offer, there's a chance that they could, and we made an offer based on the gross cost less the anticipated price of tearing the building down.
Mike, is the property adjacent to Peters Rock, so will it
It is.
contiguous, I guess I should say?
I wouldn't say it's contiguous, there may be a space between, but it's very nearby. And the Peters Rock Association has spoken to me about this property for years. It did come up. The property was in probate. The probate, I apparently have heard has been settled. We've heard that it has been. So we made the offer. We do the Blue Book appraisals by the rules and regulations of the government. And the Blue Book appraisals establish what the outside evaluators determine the market value to be. Generally, that is less or on par with what the sellers would like. So we're waiting to see what they say, Pat, whether or not they'll accept our offer.
The resolution mentions cleanup and remediation. Is that just standard boilerplate language, or are we aware that there's some remediation, you know?
So they could come back and offer a counter price, Tim,
Yeah.
which would include us doing the remediation.
But the remediation you're talking about, I mean, I'm talking about environmental. You're just talking about taking the building down, which,
Well, there could be environmentals, we don't know
Yeah,
that, so
okay.
that's a possibility.
right?
Most properties, the owner of the property, that remediation, that contamination, if
Should
there
be
is
theirs.
contamination, follows them
Right.
when they
Yeah.
sell the building, or
Right.
sell the property.
Right, it's their liability.
It's their
So-
liability no matter what.
Let me just say, because Pat's on the Open Space Advisory Commission that we have. We recommissioned them a couple of years ago. They've come up with several properties. The available sellers are dwindling. I don't see much more on open space other than these two properties right now. We've purchased some properties, much to the delight of the people who really support open space. The concept is designed to prevent intrusive development in neighborhoods. That's why we go forward with open space. So the other properties, the Yates property, it's about 15 acres on the western side of town. And that was, as Pat would know, that was a very important initiative for the Open Space Committee. So I don't anticipate us spending the 500, but it's 500. And if the Peters Rock property falls off, then it would be just the cost of what the other property is, which is about $340,000 roughly. That's where we're at.
Any other questions?
By keeping this an open amount such as this, it may be a smart move in that it doesn't really show the sellers of land exactly what the limit is that we would pay for any given piece. So this might be a good way of handling it, and then that committee can have some leeway to work. So yes.
Can I have a motion to accept the resolution?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Pat, we thank you for representing this
Pat, nice
board in
job.
open space.
Very good.
Second resolution, resolved that the Board of Finance recommends that the town of North Haven appropriate $2 million for milling and paving of town roads. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition and construction costs, equipment, furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architectural fees, engineering fees, other consultant fees, legal fees, net temporary interest and other financial costs, and other expenses related to the project, and the town issue bonds or notes and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $2 million to finance the appropriation. Discussion. We've been working on, we've done a lot of roads.
Yeah, so
lately.
what this does, ladies and gentlemen, and those watching on North Haven TV, this gets us another 10 miles worth of roadways. The approximate cost is about $200,000. This is a very important initiative. People like their roads paved. It looks good for the town when the roads are paved. And this is a part of an ongoing improvement program here in the town of North Haven and updating the infrastructure.
So are we working on a plan, Mike, like we have a list and we go down the list, or do we reassess that list at some point?
So we have a model, that's a computerized model, Diane, that every year recalibrates the point system of the roads, and we work with the engineer. The engineers tell us their recommendation, which roads should be paved
Okay.
based on the rating.
Okay, so we review it every year?
Every year, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, there's no blanket reassessment that occurs on a 3 or 5 year basis?
It's a rotating, or I should say, every year there's a diminishing point system that's a computerized model that's based on the usage of the roads, the traffic. So as an example, a road could be rated 52 one year and perhaps a 49 the next year. So, but every year the engineer watches that and makes a recommendation to us, so.
Okay, so this fits within the $2 million sum, though. It fits within the continuation of a long-term plan, or is it a 5-year? When do you, again, reassess or decide to make changes in the amount of, or the mileage, or any other things that are related to it, the annual expense here of $2 million?
Well, it's a good question. We have stayed with $2 million a year because we feel that a yearly plan at 10 miles a year really improves the town an awful lot. And keep in mind, we have an outstanding relationship with the DOT here, so they help us and pave the state roads. And we're directly involved with some projects with them that have done some state roads here in town. So $2 million seems to serve the purpose right now. And folks, we have to understand that one of the things that Ed and I do all the time is analyze the debt service in the town of North Haven. And there's a lot of wants and needs in town. Every department perhaps needs something. This board's obligation is to determine what the taxpayers can afford. So I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. That the Amazon income projected to come in, there seems to be a perception sometimes that, well, we got all this new income coming in, let's spend it on this or that. The reality of the situation is, I want everyone here to understand, the reality of the situation is that we have to start paying the middle school that we built a year and a half, 2 years ago. We have a police department that's being renovated. We're still paying off the debt service on the fire departments in town. And we keep going every year to borrow $2 million to do roads. We've bought open space. One of the things that this government will never do is allow us to get over-leveraged on debt service based on debt service to expenditures, debt burden to grand list, and debt ratio to assets. So we watch this very, very closely, Ed and I. Ed?
Yeah, no, we do.
In light, by the way, on a related subject, in light of Hamden's recent grant from the state for sidewalk improvements and repair, does the town want to take any responsibility, or does the town want to, North Haven, do we want to intervene or get involved in the quality of sidewalks on any of our streets?
So that's another very good question, because Lynn Sadowski and I, we experienced a problem a few years ago. We got grants for Skiff Street. We had, I think it was $148,000. We did sidewalks up to Van Rose. And Mike Nappy, who's here tonight, he lives on Skiff Street. But the grant did not bring it all the way up to Hartford Turnpike or Ridge Road. So we support sidewalks, love sidewalks. Yeah, our Planning and Zoning Commission does a great job on new development in requiring sidewalks to be built, whether it's subdevelopments or whether it's the economic development projects that we bring forward to go to planning and zoning. But we learned a valuable lesson a few years ago, and I won't mention the street. Residents on the street asked us to apply for a grant for sidewalks, which we started to. And then we found out that there were half the residents on the street that didn't want the sidewalks. And they got into an acrimonious confrontation with their neighbors. And what we learned was people don't necessarily want sidewalks where they don't have them, because they then are required to maintain the sidewalks from a shoveling standpoint. And if the sidewalk then becomes damaged in 2 or 3 years, they have to endure the replacement costs. And a lot of residents didn't want that. So we were surprised. There was a wide variety of opinions on this in terms of trying to sidewalk streets that particular time. So, so to further answer your question, Michael, tomorrow I think I'm going to be seeing Mayor Lang at a statewide mayor's meeting. And I plan to ask him how he's handled this, because I saw that where they got the grants.
Yeah, I didn't know exactly how much was slated for expansion of the sidewalk system as opposed to repair and replacement.
What I'm thinking is that the grant that Hamden got, and I might be wrong about this, is designed to upgrade the town sidewalks, not necessarily the resident sidewalks.
Okay. Thank you.
A little off topic. Any other questions on this resolution? Can I have a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll move it.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
One of the things I promised last month, preliminary update and review of fire. I'd like to acknowledge correspondence from Kathy Grant in regards to increasing staffing and equipment in the fire department. Mike Callahan, I read a section of this letter at our August meeting. Now, as to the update, where the first selectman put together a group of myself, Michael, first selectman, chief and deputy chief from fire are there. We have not completed our overall review of all items. I would expect 2 more meetings by October. We should be finished. Next month we should.
Not by the end of October.
By the end of October, we should be pretty much finished with the preliminary, and we will draft some suggestions. But I just want to at least let the board members know some of the specifics that we have determined. Medical assistance calls were about 63% of the total alarms the fire department received. If you discount false alarms, it really is 71% of the calls they get. Of the 1,222 calls in the 6-month period we reviewed, there was anywhere from 500 to 600 additional calls that AMR responded to. Of those calls, the lion's share of it, maybe 400 calls, were non-emergency transport type calls. But AMR, because the fire department has primary responsibility, has to notify fire.
Sorry, Rich, could you give us that last number again? Was it, you said they were transport or not?
They were strictly calls. There was a number of those calls, probably 300 to 400 of them, that were strictly transport, like
Of the 5
take
to
someone
6,
from
yeah, okay.
one place to the hospital,
Yeah.
what have you. In the same 6-month period, there were 703 calls to fire for non-medical items. Of those calls, 23% are false alarms, which really drops the call volume they received in that 6 months to 494. Roughly 14.7% of those calls are auto accidents, which is the highest percentage of any calls that the fire department responds to. And that's basically because North Haven's responsible for 91 and 15. And the chief has even made comments that when they go for training and they hear North Haven about rescue from a vehicle, they said, you guys already know it. In a 17-month period, in a year and a half period, the fire department called for mutual aid 13 times. That mutual aid could have been, and we didn't get a full breakdown, Michael, that I can remember, but some of them could just be calling a town to position equipment near our borders because they're occupied with something else, or it could have actually been to respond and help them fight a fire. In that same time period, North Haven responded to 3 requests for mutual aid, where we reciprocated that help. those are the basic numbers we're working with. From what we can gather, all medicals are answered, anywhere from a 6-minute to, say, 9.5-minute time frame, and that's all rough numbers. There's only 13 times in a year and a half where we actually asked for assistance from other towns.
Is that for fires, Rich, or medical? Would you say?
No, that was for fires. Or, it could be and again, there's a bunch of instances. They could have responded to a fire, they could respond to a chemical spill,
Okay.
where they may have then requested, Hamden say, to position an engine near our border in case something else happened. And I guess that's a common thing. When you're going to be tied up for any period of time, they'll call for mutual aid
Right.
because they want to make sure there's equipment close. It could be Wallingford moving something close to our border, or actually helping them fight a fire, which,
Right.
you know, on Quinnipiac, I think everyone was there.
Yeah.
Every town was there.
What was the percentage for false alarms?
About 23%.
And what constitutes a false alarm?
Faulty smoke alarm,
23%?
yeah.
That's high.
Or there's been calls, some of the calls, when you looked at the times, it could have been an alarm that went off where they weren't even off the apron of the firehouse and it was canceled. But they can get to a building and it was a faulty fire alarm system went off. I mean, it's not, the numbers are there. They
Is that
list them
old-
up.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Is that because of old infrastructure? Or-
In those buildings?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, fire alarms themselves can malfunction just from dust, because that's what they're actually doing. They're sending a beam out, and if there's dirt in the air and it sees that as blocking their beam, alarms can trip.
Yeah, but it's almost a quarter of the calls.
It's the numbers and the information that the fire department gave us. They gave us a list of all their call runs, and we just sorted it and worked up some percentages to see what was really happening.
Yeah, Pat, you never burned a steak in your life?
Never.
Never? No.
I mean,
My
they
detector
had-
goes off every time I try to cook.
They had 58 items marked as false alarm, false alarm or false call, dispatch and canceled en route, alarm system no fire, dispatch error, smoke detector activated no fire, alarm system sounded due to malfunction, smoke detector activated due to malfunction, CO detector activated due to malfunction, unintentional transmission of alarm. That's some of the classification. Or there was, for instance, they arrived, there was nothing there. I mean, sprinkler activated due to malfunction. Those all trip companies and residential fire alarm systems, but there's pretty much nothing there. So it'll go, if they're canceled en route, I assume they turn around. If they're not canceled en route, they go there, see there's nothing, come back to the station. I mean, they're still out making the call, but other than investigating and seeing that there's nothing there, there's no other action they really take. And that is, actually the highest percentage of their calls, 23%. Followed by the 14.7 for auto accidents. So, when you look at it that way, you're what, 47, almost 48% of their calls are either false alarms or accidents that are non-medical. Medical outweighs everyone. Medical's over 1,200 calls that they respond to. That was strictly, non-medical calls. But Michael and I hope to finish everything in October. We'll come up with a list of recommendations for the Board of Selectmen. We'll bring yous up to date. And that's kind of where we are. I'm trying to treat this the same way we treat budget cycles, in that we're trying not to draw conclusions until we finish accumulating all the information. We don't want to bias our opinions in any way. So that's kind of all I have for you. Any questions you may have for either one of us?
I think one other thing should be stated. No matter, whatever the recommendations end up to be, I want to be very clear and specific here, they cannot exceed over $220,000, because that is what's in the budget for this fiscal year. In other words, if the recommendations exceed $220,000, we can't spend it. We cannot add full-time personnel during the middle of a fiscal year, or at any point in time during the fiscal year, because the referendum had passed in May. This 220 was what we put in to commission this work group, and they're working very well in a bipartisan fashion. Michael, Rich, Ed, and the fire chief, Paul Januszewski. $220,000 is all we have to spend.
So this wouldn't fall under the contingency plan?
No, we set aside 220,000, if you remember, at budget time.
But if we needed more?
Contingency is an emergency appropriation.
Yes, I know.
I mean, I don't want to start drawing conclusions right now, but I mean, preliminarily, there's, of the 400 and some odd fire calls, I mean, there's only 13 times they needed to call a town for mutual aid. And again, there's 3 times we provided the mutual aid. And medical, technically, AMR, who responded to those transport calls and some other medical calls, I'm sure were in that group, they're like our mutual aid. But once we finish, then we'll start drawing the conclusions as to what the options are.
And that will be the end of October?
Yeah, we should
So
we should
November
finish it in
before-
October. We have one meeting scheduled for the beginning of October. We'll schedule another one in October, and that should finish all the categories we were looking at. Again, I'm trying to not draw conclusions, keep an open mind until we have all the information. But I promise to share some stuff with you, so I figured I'd at least give you those numbers to think about, so you're not worried that, you know, there's calls not being responded to. Okay? Anything else?
Can I
Yeah.
add a little?
Certainly, sir.
Some of the recommendations that are likely to occur at the end will be more long-term or fit or be addressed for situations outside of the current fiscal year.
Yes.
So certainly $200,000 in the middle of a fiscal year can
Can go a long way.
It can mitigate. It can have some impact, especially if you know, it's not enacted until January 1st or beyond. So we will have some I think some short-term advice and some long-term options that are presented to the town. Just to add, though, I just want to say the calculation I did on the degree of auto incidents, automobile incidents, I came up with a slightly higher amount than that, and I'll
Okay.
show you my math at some future point.
Yeah,
But it's a significant demand on the fire department with the highways.
we actually understand that at one point, the state used to reimburse municipalities. They no longer do that.
Right, they do not. It's good to make that clear to the public. I believe we've had 4 meetings so far, and they are quite enlightening and
Lengthy.
It's made us much more aware of the situation, and I think that we are learning things every day. So this group that is called the North Haven Fire and Medical Workshop Group, the Services Workshop Group, is, I think, achieving its intended purpose. And so I look forward to continuing to carry this through. Just two minor notes here from the meetings we've had so far. And one is that the first selectman has made this clear, I think, at a high school town meeting before. The fire department is in pursuit of the PSA or PSAR for basic life support for BLS that is currently possessed by AMR. The fire department is trying to take that back within town control. It may at some point be subcontracted back out to them, but it'll be done so with certain guidelines and stipulations and methods of evaluation that allow us to impact the standard of service, its consistency and its dependability and its scope. So anyway, that will be more clarified in our later report, but I think that's important for the town people to know that there are changes that are occurring with regard to fire services right now. And because of that change, we're a little limited in information we can get directly from AMR. And that's also impacting the committee. But we are trying to work around this as best we can. The other one minor item that I wanted to make known to the public now is that, not to alarm anyone, but AMR does not carry in every vehicle an opioid antagonist, Narcan or naloxone or whatever the commercial names of that product are. They don't carry it on most vehicles. And with the opioid crisis, you might think, well, that's a pretty important item for them to have. But because the first responders to most situations are either the fire department or the police department, and that the first selectmen and others in town have signed an oath that it will be on every town emergency vehicle, there is a great degree of readiness when it comes to any overdoses. So I just wanted to make that clear, and you can correct or add whatever you wish, Mr.
No,
Green.
our police department has done a great job in saving the lives of those who have overdosed because we made the investment in Narcan with our police department. Generally, they're there.
Yeah, they're there first.
Generally, they're the first responders, but that's a commitment we have here, because that's a whole other subject that I'm spearheading here with other people, is the substance abuse awareness, and I'm actually championing this at a state level.
I would assume police probably beat fire to the scene, basically because they're physically on the road.
Right.
So, anything else from board members?
I just wanted to know, with regard to the town bonded aid, are we receiving, did we get any word back on the equipment request from the state? Were there 4 pieces of equipment we were trying to obtain?
Yeah, we had several pieces on that list, and some of them we've already put out
Put-
to bid, because the timeline is so long to get the pieces of equipment in. They'll probably take 6 months to make. That would be some of the Packard trucks, the dump trucks. And as you see on the list, one of the rollers was purchased, but that was less than $20,000.
Yeah. Okay. And I believe the fire department has applied for money for a certain tactical vehicle. I think it does a brush truck or something of that sort.
Are you
Okay.
referring to the CERT truck?
No.
No, I don't think so, no. All right, I'll find more
I
information
thought he mentioned they
before I question
Were they
any
in the
further.
process of doing it, or did he actually do it?
I
I got the impression he was in the process. Maybe I'm wrong. Are they gonna
Yeah. well,
modify certain equipment?
We'll add that to our questions at our next
you go.
workshop meeting. Okay, that's all today.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we move to public comment. Sally?
Good evening,
Evening.
guys. Sally Boehme, 5 Blossom Drive. I had some questions on for the 18-19 fiscal year, the monthly revenue report. I mean, it wouldn't be a normal meeting if I didn't bring up MRSA. In the revenue report, it's showing 96.
Do you like the new line item you put in there?
Yes, it showed, I do. It showed that we've received 96,000 year-to-date in revenue from MRSA. It's my understanding that the past several years, we always received our 1.44 million in MRSA money in one lump payment in late June.
That's correct.
Why is it showing on the revenue report?
Because what I've tried to
96,000.
Yeah, what I've tried to let everybody know is that is a placeholder for how much has been spent that relates to that grant. So after 2 months, the figure that we spent through Public Works. I've done the same thing for the past several years.
Okay,
So
well,
every month I
yeah.
just charge it to that.
Okay, so even though we haven't received it. and-
Right, it just.
Okay, I
Otherwise,
probably
because what happens
didn't,
is all the expenses are lost in 100 different accounts. So this way you can at least see out of those accounts, this is how much is gonna be charged to MRSA.
so that's what you anticipate to use MRSA for, is that 96 thus
Yeah, we
far?
spent 96 that we can charge to that grant.
Okay, so it's, well, it's in the revenue report, not the expenditure report, so that's why
Right.
it was a little
Correct.
confusing to me, because it
Because-
looks like it's money that came in, because it says received.
Yeah.
So,
'Cause in the
okay,
expenditure report, it's in 100 different line items.
I got you. And then, on page 2 of the revenue report, in the, in lieu of line item, which has 540,000, now that includes the 300,000 anticipated voluntary payment from Quinnipiac. In our budget book, it's listed separately on page 7 of the revenue, but on the revenue, in the revenue budget, on the regular big thick budget book, they're listed separately, 240 for, and then 300. In the revenue report, they're combined. And I was just wondering why you do that, and could you separate them the way they're separated in the,
Yeah, I could do that.
Budget.
Break 'em up. Yeah, that won't take
and
long.
what
It'll
is
take
the
one to
240 portion of that? What is the source of that money?
account. The water company, there's a pilot from the water company.
Okay. And so just following up on the Quinnipiac, I believe our first voluntary payment from Quinnipiac was in October of 2015. It was 142,000. It was presented, I believe, at an Economic Development Commission breakfast, right? Mr. Fried is nodding yes. I always like when I'm talking and he's nodding yes. So here we are a few years later with it, I expected it to be going up a little bit more. You mentioned that you met with the president of Quinnipiac. First, are you confident that they will continue with the change in administration at Quinnipiac? And are they still using that formula that we had reviewed way back when this started, which was in the memorandum of understanding that they had with Hamden? It had a very specific, you might recall, description of how it was calculated. And even though we didn't have a written memorandum of understanding, the understanding verbally was that we would follow a similar pattern. And so I would have expected it to be much higher than it is now. So if you could answer those two questions.
Well, it's higher than what it was.
Yeah.
And it's not as high as maybe it would have been because the state has decreased the pilot down through the years.
Okay.
And the formula we put together with
Right.
Quinnipiac was based on a state reimbursement.
We're getting 40% of the pilot, not the total pilot payment, but the portion of the pilot
Right.
payment attributed to only Quinnipiac property, because obviously there's 3 components to our pilot: the Quinnipiac, Divine Street Hospital, and then the state, the Gateway. So I understand that. So that's pretty much why it's not, I was hopeful it would be higher, but you still are confident we're going to continue to get
Oh,
it?
yes.
Good.
Actually, they actually gave us more than the 40%. They really gave us more than.
Well, they
the
gave us a
formula.
special extra money to put up a scoreboard somewhere, I think, right?
So we're building playscapes,
Yeah.
Ridge Road. So to answer your question, Sally, yeah, I fully anticipate that we will receive the pilot, and I'm hoping it'll grow.
So your dinner went well with the president.
That dinner couldn't have gone any better.
Well, have dinner with Yale, because that's my next question. Any luck with getting we discussed a few months ago, maybe 6 months, the months fly by, don't they? I had asked about a potential voluntary payment from our friends at Yale for their facility on Divine Street, which is a very heavy user of our emergency medical services, and I'll talk about that when I get to my fire department portion. But is there any progress on talking to the folks at Yale to see if they would like to kick in a little bit for all the wonderful services they get here for free?
There's no progress on that.
No
that
progress,
initiative.
darn it. Well, plan another dinner. I had some questions on the expenditure report, but Ms. Fasicchio and Mr. Hallahan touched on a few of them. I just had a question on page 6, personnel policy. I was wondering why we're already 18% over budget after 2 months.
Well, that's probably have to do with retirement stuff at the police department.
Okay.
Is that what that is?
Page 6, personnel policy, there's a one line item is 18% over budget already.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Whenever they happen, actually.
And let's see, Mr. Hallahan talked about IT. On the fire, on page 10, Mr. Hallahan touched on my EMT question, but I had another one under fire, but on page 11, it's a consultant line item where we appropriated 0, but we have already spent 19,300. And again, we appropriated 0. Do you see that on page 11, consultants?
Yeah.
Under
that's-
fire, what is that for?
He works on the
Oh,
fire fees.
Okay, so that's who we hired to help with the, okay. And Mr. Hallahan had asked about the building fees for Amazon, and Mr. Frieda was correct when we first anticipated the revenue and we were contemplating the 50% abatement. We were hoping for the $2 million to be cut to $1 million, but then 6 months or so later at a Board of Selectmen meeting, when we actually signed the agreement, we were told at that public meeting that the building fees, don't confuse them with the fire, the building fees would be about $650,000. So I was a little disappointed it was a little lower than we were promised at the time that we gave the abatement. And Mr. Frieda was correct when he said that we received 1.4 million in building fees in 17-18, but we did budget 1,850,000, so we were still about 413,000 under budget on the building fee revenue line item, but I thought that was more because of the delay in the Amazon construction.
That was definitely part of it, yes.
Yeah. But you were correct in that 1.4 million. I don't think you're correct in the amount of money that we put aside for fire. I thought it was 140,000, not 220. 220 is the security
Yeah, I got
guard.
him confused.
Oh, it's-
The
oh, okay.
220 is the supernumerary.
Yes, right.
I say security guard because I
140,
can't say
yeah.
supernumerary.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because we're working with these two numbers. So 140, which is even less than what we presented here tonight.
I know, I told you 220.
Right,
Right.
that's supernumeraries, that's right.
So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm sure Ms. White was going to say something about that, too. And finally, at the August Board of Finance meeting, there was discussion that the 17-18 surplus was 1.7 million. At the Board of Selectmen meeting, a couple of weeks later, the first selectman was asked how much the surplus was, and he said it was 367,000, and recommended that I speak, or not me personally, but anyone to speak with Ed, which I did. And you verified that it was 1.7, but that the 1.05 million that we're using in the fund balance for 18-19 was subtracted from that. But that still doesn't get it to 367.
No, but in the interim, there are several other things I was working on to close out my year. I mean, I'm trying to put reports together in the
Right.
first month after the end of the fiscal year. So
But-
there are other things that ended up going into that number.
But the surplus was the 1.7 million.
Right.
But let me jump in here, because
Okay.
I want to be very clear, because we disagree on this, Sally and I. Technically, it is, but we already had rolled in a large portion of that as revenue. And you have to understand where I'm coming from on this. I report information in real-time fashion. At the same time I was reporting the 367, which is, at the time, the net amount with not counting what was already accounted for in revenue, I was making a point that out of the 367 net, 220 would be spent for supernumeraries. It would be deceptive for me to talk about an aggregate surplus when the largest part of it already been accounted for revenue. So technically, yes, you're right, but I talk to the people in layman's language so they understand what the net impact is. That's why I reported it that way. Ed?
No.
Well, okay, I understand your point of view, but what you're doing is you're taking the 1.7 surplus 1.7 million surplus from 17-18, you're subtracting a revenue line item for the 18-19. We have, the fund balance is a regular line item in every one of our budgets. The amount that we use on that line item differs every year. I have a list of all of them from the past 9 years, and they're all over the place, anywhere from 1.6 to 1.8 million, 300,000, 750,000. I don't ever, so every year, when we pass the referendum in May, it includes a revenue line item where we're using some of the fund balance. I don't ever recall subtracting that from the previous fiscal year. So that's why it surprised me. I know what you've done, I understand that. I don't understand why you did it this year, and I've never heard it subtracted before.
Because of the supernumerary application towards the surplus. That's why I did it this year.
Well, that's 220. That doesn't get 1.7 down to 300.
But the point I was making
Anyway,
was the 220 goes against the net surplus, which at the time was 367, showing the public that we're covering the supernumeraries through the net surplus, not covering it through what was already accounted for as revenue in this budget.
I disagree. The net surplus was 1.7 million. You have to have the surplus in order to use some of it for revenue the following fiscal year, which is what we did. We used $1,050,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. So, but anyway,
Nonetheless, we ran a surplus when other municipalities are
Okay.
6, 8, 12,
No,
$15 million
I-
in deficit, ladies and gentlemen.
surpluses are great, but, it was 1.7. Okay.
But that's a good, we should, this is a thing that people sometimes don't understand. I understand that the job of an elected official is to accept the criticisms and the debates, but the reality is surrounding cities and towns are either going to be taken over by the state or they'll never make up without taxing their way out of the deficits they're in. We've balanced 9 consecutive budgets and delivered 5 surpluses. I'd rather be in that position to debate what the actual surplus is than to be reporting we're $8 million in a hole.
Okay, there is no
Thanks,
debate. It was 1.7, and we used some of it for the following year. I just listened very intently to your discussions about this fire committee, and I thought I would take the opportunity. I've said many times that I've done a lot of research on this issue, and I'll be anxiously awaiting the recommendations from this committee in probably a couple of months, based on what you've said. But a couple of things I just wanted to share with you. I looked at a list of all of the towns in the state by population, and North Haven was 48th, I think, with about 24,000, and I looked at municipalities near that. In the 22 to 26,000 range. I looked at 8 municipalities. 4 of them, Simsbury, Watertown, Weathersfield, and Bloomfield, are all volunteer. They have no paid firefighters, paramedics at all. The ambulance comes. Farmington, just 25,500 people, has 147 volunteers, but they do have 8 paid firefighters, but they work only Monday through Friday from 7 to 5 p.m. And during those hours, they do provide medical services. Ridgefield and Guilford were the 2 towns most similar to ours in population size, although both of them very significantly larger in area, that are similar to ours in that we have a combination of paid firefighters with paramedics and volunteers. Ridgefield has 34 paid firefighters, 18 of which are paramedics. They have 57 volunteers. Their town is 35 square miles. Ours is 21. Guilford, also 23,000, which is 49 square miles. I didn't realize Guilford was so big. They have 32 paid, but I believe they might be trying to get a safer grant for more hirees. I don't know what the status of that is. But so the 2 towns that I were able to find similar to ours with the similar type of fire department, meaning combination of paid career firefighters with volunteers and providing paramedic services. We have 32 firefighters, so we're pretty much right in line with those. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Sally?
for your information. Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where do we stand relative to Branford?
I
do you have
didn't do
stats?
Branford because they were so much higher in population, and they have, so I don't know.
Because they just got a SAFER grant,
Did they?
and,
Okay.
and they're hiring 8.
They are, okay. And I listened very intently to the chairman's report of statistics. I studied every call for a couple of months. I picked June of 2018 and December of 2017, and I looked at every call, and I agree there were a lot of false alarms, a lot of cancellations en route, whatnot. But one thing that really stuck out to me, hold on a second. Was the number of calls that we're making to Divine Street, which is the Yale
The medicals.
facility.
Medicals you're talking about.
Medical calls, the number of medical calls that we make to Divine Street, which is the Yale facility, which is why I think you have to have progress on that voluntary payment, and also to other medical facilities like Monterey's Rehab. In December of 2017, there were 40 calls just for that month to those two places, and in June there were 35. And I was talking today with the fire chief, I don't remember his last name, his name's Dave, of a town on my list, and he was talking to me about that, and about the drain that facilities like that could have on emergency medical services, rehab places, nursing homes and whatnot. And he said that in his town, they have agreements with those types of facilities that they won't call 911 if it's going to be a transport, because we can't transport. We
My-
don't transport. So what would, this is just food
Sure.
for your committee to possibly think about talking with these facilities that, although one is a taxpayer, one is tax exempt, are a tremendous strain on our emergency medical services, on the backs of the taxpayers. Is there something we could do with an agreement with them to minimize the very high volume of calls that we have to those types of facilities,
Yes.
which have tons of doctors? What do they need our paramedics for?
Yes,
Okay,
but there's two problems.
All
Or there's
right.
2 parts to the problem.
all right,
The first part, if it does go 911, fire department has to
we have to
respond.
go, right.
AMR, my understanding is positioning a unit in that area, and they're trying to convince Yale, because they have an agreement with Yale to do all Yale's transports, to, if it's not a 911 emergency call, it's just a transport, to call them direct. I don't know how much headway they've made on that. Hopefully in the next month, we'll find that out.
But, keeping.
But if they can,
Okay.
because AMR has an agreement with Yale to do all their transport, if it's not an emergency call and it's just to transport someone, as long as they don't use the 911 system, those calls disappear from us.
Well, that's what I was
Yeah.
talking about with this chief today, and he said he had discussions with a lot of these, he has more facilities in number in his town, and he said he talked with
Yeah.
them, and they're, don't call 911, because like you say, once 911 is called,
We
we're
have to
off.
go.
I understand that.
But
So-
AMR is trying to pursue that.
Okay, so that's just something that I've talked with a lot of professional people in the fire industry, including our own fire chief, and that's just one thing that I noticed. It's very striking when I looked at the monthly reports, just how many emergency calls are going to these types of medical facilities. Another thing that back when this committee was formed, I suggested a volunteer fireman on it, and I was a little disappointed that you did not do that, because in all of my discussions with fire chiefs around the state that have either all volunteer fire departments or combinations like we do, they were stressing to me how crucial it is to not only recruit, but to retain volunteers. And so I really think that we need to improve the recruiting and retention of our volunteers, and I plan on going to the board, the fire commission. I'm sure they'll love to see me, and talk to them about my suggestions on how they could improve retention of volunteers.
Please do. That's actually the topic of our October 2nd meeting.
Right.
And we're
And-
bringing in the captains from the volunteers.
And you gave another issue that kept coming up in my research and my discussions was mutual aid. And you gave, Mr. Chairman, some statistics that we called in mutual aid 13 times, and we provided mutual aid, I believe you said 3 times.
3 times. That's what the chief gave us.
And to me, that's another issue that I hope your committee's looking into, is improving mutual aid and the efficiency of mutual aid. And in the long term, I've spoken with the first selectman at Board of Selectmen meetings about this issue of regionalization in a lot of different areas of government service. And so, it's, in my opinion, in the long term, regionalization of fire service is really the only way that's going to really be a long-term solution. I mean, I think of the fire headquarters that Hamden has on that X intersection, what is it, Hartford Turnpike and Ridge Road. That's really very much closer to many residences in North Haven than our central headquarters. So, I mean, obviously, your committee is not here formed to solve the problems of the state of fire service, but I'm just throwing this out there that I believe very strongly that fire service is one of the areas, public works maybe being another, where regionalization is going to be the wave of the future. So I just wanted to share those thoughts, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Ms. White.
Mary White, Summer Lane. I have a few questions and then suggestions. One of the statistics you gave was 500 to 600 calls AMR responded.
Yes.
How many times of the 500 to 600 AMR calls that they responded to, how many times do we know if AMR provided a paramedic?
I don't have that information.
Could you get it?
We've asked the chief for it.
Okay, because that would be interesting.
I think they're waiting to get the PSR resolved before
Okay.
they explore that information for us. We've asked for that type of information. But we were also told, or I was also suggested that most of those were just calls for transport where they didn't really require.
Well, you gave another
paramedic.
figure of 300 to 400 calls AMR for just transport.
That were probably just, they were transport calls.
So, which is it? I mean, are these
No, there
medical?
were
Are these
there
500
was
to
500
600 medical calls?
There were 500 to 600 calls that AMR responded to that the fire department did not respond to.
They do not
Of
respond
those calls, 300 to 400 of them were strictly for transport.
to transport. So there
And again,
could
this was a
be
6-month period
there could be about 200 calls
where they
based
were
on
medical.
what you're saying, where
Yeah,
they were medical.
Could be.
So then, can
Could be
we
300.
ask of those 200 medical calls? Okay, how many times did AMR provide a paramedic?
We can ask the
we could
chief to
ask.
try and get the information for us.
Okay. How many times did the fireman paramedic on active duty have to go in the ambulance to maintain the continuity of care, whatever time frame you're doing, 18 months or 12 months?
Actually, we were not given a specific number, but the chief indicated that most times when AMR has been showing up, especially over this last 6-8 months, they've had paramedics on the unit.
They have, okay. Because we know
Agreed,
the,
Michael? 'Cause-
Yeah, but he also said that whichever paramedic began treatment, I believe they're not allowed to.
They have to make sure the care is equal. So if it's an equal paramedic, I mean, that was his only position. But we haven't been transporting, as far as I know, very much because our billing hasn't been there.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Let's see.
That's why they only have like, the last year, like 30,000. or something in the pipeline? 36,000.
Yeah, but let me explain that, because another key important point here. We invested and added another deputy chief. Scott Martis has done a brilliant job in working with Chief Januszewski. And as a result of that, up until recently, AMR's response times have been decreased by 1 minute because Scott Martis is in the system. And I commend him for watching and doing what he's doing.
Okay. So, did the chair confirm that AMR has an ambulance stationed in North Haven at the fairgrounds and one stationed on Divine Street? And did you, or could you confirm whether or not paramedics are scheduled on those ambulances, or is it just a random thing?
We have not met with AMR. I can tell you that there is a unit on Divine Street. I don't know across from Fairgrounds. I was told there was one at the Fairgrounds. I know for a fact there's one on Divine Street. My office is on Divine Street. I know that, or I should make an assumption that based on what the chief has told us, where they have not had to send the paramedic out of town, that most of those units had paramedics on them.
Okay.
Again, the chief doesn't want us dealing with AMR because he's in the middle of PSR, so our information isn't as refined in that regard, but we are planning on that being one of the last topics we hit before we conclude our discussions.
Okay. So in April 2018, there were 76 simultaneous overlapping calls. In May of this year, there were 92 simultaneous overlapping calls, and in June, there were 96 overlapping calls. What is the number for the total overlapping simultaneous calls, either yearly or in 18 months?
You have to ask the chief.
Okay.
All I can say is the 6-month period they gave us, the fire department or AMR responded to all those calls. And it looks like the response time ran between 6 and 9 minutes and 18 seconds on average.
So you're saying in 6 months,
In the 6-month period
there
of
were
data the chief
overlapping
gave us.
calls?
In the 6-month period the chief gave us, with the 1,222 calls they responded and the 600 calls, 400 to 600 calls that AMR responded to without the fire department, those calls were responded in anywhere from 6 minutes and 15 seconds to 9 minutes and 18 seconds on average.
Okay.
I don't have specifics as to what days there was calls overlapping, but realize
Yeah, 'cause-
even when there are calls, the fire department responds,
Right.
can respond to 2 medicals alone.
We've established that, and so that's a good thing. But what is the problem is that they're responding with the trucks, with the firemen on there as EMTs. So they're not responding to these second overlapping calls.
One of the
Because there's only
suggestions-
one fireman paramedic on active duty
No,
per
there is-
We're
shift.
working on that issue.
We're working on the issue. There's 2 to 3 paramedics on every shift,
I'm aware of that, but only one is in that,
is in the rescue unit.
right.
When the second unit goes out, the engine, there's a paramedic in that staff.
Right, but I was told.
All he needs to do is put paramedic equipment on the engine, and now you have a paramedic responding.
But
you've
right
just
now, there's
doubled- you
no
just doubled your-
paramedic equipment on the engine.
That's probably going to be one of the recommendations we've made, or we will make, is that they equip the engine with paramedic equipment, since the paramedic is there, and he can respond to a life and death situation, which would double the amount of response times that paramedics the town itself performs.
Right, because that's one of the
But
things.
that's one of the suggestions, actually,
That's being floated.
that we made to the fire chief. We're the layman.
Let's see, I wonder if that would impact if there's a fire call at that time.
My
Because
position-
there's a certain number of firefighters that have to be ready to go to respond to a fire. So
My
what would
position-
happen if you take a fireman who's assigned to a truck, and then he's the second call, okay, he's responding to an emergency, and he can't leave that person, you know, because you're saying there's like maybe 9 minutes possibly before, I guess, what, AMR could get
No,
there or
9 minutes.
whatever.
In reality, 9 minutes before the fire, 6 to 9 minutes before the engine's there, if the engine's there within 6 minutes, most likely, based on the average times we were given, AMR is there at most 3 minutes after that.
And if they
my
come
thought would
without
be-
a
My
paramedic,
thought would be, if you had the
guy has-
paramedic on the engine, isn't it better that he, and it is a life and death situation,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it better that he treats that and not worry about the possibility in the next 15 or 20 minutes there may be a fire call? And that's what you
absolutely.
that's what you use mutual aid for, if it ends up being that.
Right.
The other option was if, and this, again, we're talking Little House School because we haven't finalized everything, we haven't finalized our recommendations, but you're making me expand on it a little bit. If that, for some reason, that paramedic needed to leave the scene for transport, then the chief would have to backfill that fourth man on the engine. Not that, it seems like, kind of cut and dry. It makes
Well, he
sense.
would call the volunteers.
Yeah, you have
then he
volunteers, you
would-
have other things
and
that
then
you can do.
Then you do
But,
overtime
I
or
mean,
mutual aid.
it would make sense that if you had a second medical that required a paramedic to save a life,
Mm-hmm.
that's more important than the possibility that we may get a fire alarm call in that 15 or 20-minute
Mm-hmm.
period, realizing that 23% of the time it's a false alarm anyway.
Right. No, I absolutely
You gotta-
agree
you gotta
agree
look at
with
the
that.
numbers,
I
yeah.
have been talking for over a year about how can we get, we can't even talk about the third call, simultaneous call, but at least the second call, trying to get a fireman, paramedic, active duty, how to get him
Put the
to
equipment
that
on the
call
truck.
when he's assigned to a truck.
Put the equipment on the truck. The truck goes to the
agree.
call automatically.
And we don't have a quote on how much it is to stock
the equipment?
paramedic equipment on a truck.
I mean, it's got to be minimum. What could it be? Another $4,000 or $5,000? It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Okay. All right. That
It is a
sounds good.
suggestion we made, and as we finish things, we'll evaluate it with the chief. And
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the suggestions we made, just in evaluating a little bit of information in the first 2 meetings we got.
Okay, that's good. Let's see. So,
That's why we make the big bucks.
am I correct, Mike, you gave the budget net surplus at the Board of Selectmen meeting, you said 367,000, was that correct, that number? The
So
net,
yeah, I mean-
367.
So that was real-time information, and I explained earlier why I came up with that and how we came up with it. But we're still, see, people don't realize, Mary, that, when I give real-time information, it's real-time at that time. The auditors are working with Ed to continue to close the books.
Okay.
So I'm beginning to think maybe I shouldn't give real-time information anymore. Try to be as transparent as you can
Yeah.
by telling people where we're at the time. So,
No, I appreciate that. I
and
appreciate
even
that.
your husband Tom said, he said to me, I appreciate you doing that.
We do appreciate that. And I know we understand that it could change.
Yes.
But I do have a suggestion based on that information, understanding that it could change. But anyway, here's my suggestion. So you also gave a number for the SROs. You gave 226,000, and now I heard 220,000. So is that the specific number? Is it 220? It's 220.
220,600, I think, yeah, right? It's $220,600. But nonetheless, let's say 220.
Oh, okay. So it's not 226,000.
No.
It'd be 220,600. Okay, gotcha. All right, so let's see. So if we take the SRO number, we'll just do estimating here. If you take 220,000 from 367,000, you get 147,000 is the difference. So what I would like to suggest is, since we do have that $140,000 set aside in the budget to do something with it, okay? I would like to suggest to move over at least 110,000, thus making 250,000 in that line item. So what would that do is, before the next budget cycle begins, we already have the money to hire 2 firemen paramedics. That's a suggestion, because it's $250,000 to hire 2.
I did think one thing you have to keep in mind, though, is that money that's being added to the surplus and not budgeted to next year's budget is helping us keep our fund balance at 8% of the current year expenditures. That's one of the items where it's very important we're going to bond, is that we maintain a certain level of fund balance. If I use that, I'm going to go below the 8%.
So.
Because right now, we're right at 8% at the end of the year.
Okay, so then really what you're saying is, there is only $220,000 for the SROs, and the rest, there is no balance, because that money is going to maintain the fund balance
Right, because each
at
year our
8%, so
budget
there is no
increases.
extra.
Well, there is extra for last year, but our budget keeps increasing, so to maintain 8%, you have to increase your fund balance every year.
So, and it's a good question, Mary, so let me just kind of amplify what Ed is saying, okay? So we have to keep it at 8%.
Right.
But as the budget grows every year by 2.3 or 2.4, 2.5%, the fund balance has to rise because it's 8% of the new expenditures. So this is what we're always managing here. Now, we're going out to bond here, so we have to make sure at a time when municipalities are being downgraded with their status just because of the state of Connecticut, we have to be certain that we have everything in place, including an 8% fund balance, and to maintain this AAA rated status. Because, as I said, several municipalities have been downgraded just because of the bleak situation in the state of Connecticut. So that's what Ed was saying. You know, more has to go in the fund balance every year to maintain the 8% because the expenditures rise every year.
So currently, is that fund balance, is it exactly at 8%, or is it a tad over? I thought the second selectman had done some math at the Board of Selectmen meeting, and I thought he said 8.03 or something percent.
I'm just rounding to 8%.
Okay. So can you give me you're a money guy, can you give me an idea if it is 8.03%? What does 0.03% equal money-wise?
I don't know that off the top of my head. Sorry.
I mean, do we know, is that 10,000?
Not a lot of money.
Is it $100? I mean, is it in the thousands or? Yeah.
Well, the budget's what?
90.
Okay, so 3% is 270,000, right?
And 1/10 of that is 27,000.
And
0.03.
.03 is so it'd be like 2,700? Or did I just move a decimal point? 27,000?
It's not a lot.
Maintain
That's not a lot, yeah.
8%.
No,
Yeah.
the .003. .003?
0.03.
0.03?
He said 0.03.
I didn't bring that sheet with me.
That's disappointing.
All right,
We
so-
think maybe 3,000 or something, or?
Like 27.
No, it was a lot less than that.
Lot less than that?
about 30, because 1% is about $1 million, so
What's the budget? 90.
90 something.
You think it's about 30,000?
Try to count this first. That would be correct. 30,000.
30,000? Where's my calculator?
Calculator right here. What are you trying to figure out? What's this?
Let's say it's about
30,000?
30,000.
Well, let's say it's about
Yeah.
30,000,
Okay.
that's good.
29,670.
Okay, so I wanted to revisit this idea that I presented it to you a number of months ago. Basically, it's about the turf fields. So I think we all know that it's an asset that depreciates yearly, and hopefully we'll get more than 8 years use out of them before they need to be replaced. So the town was quoted from Sprint Turf, a figure last year of $800,000 to replace the 2 turf fields. We know that the warranty expires in 8 years, and actually it'll be 7 years come the fall, because they'll be operational for a year. So we're saying about 7 years the warranty's gonna expire. So what I'm trying to suggest is that we continue to be fiscally responsible. We would never bond for an asset that depreciates so quickly.
Well,
we
do
know
that.
that-
That's not true.
Well, I think that if they do need to be replaced in 8 years, okay, bonding is 17 to 20 years, And let's just suppose that, you know, we did put it out to bond. We would be paying on the bond, and then another 8 years would pass. Let's say they needed to be replaced in 8 years. Then you'll bond again, and you'll be paying on the first bond while you're paying on the second bond. That doesn't make fiscal sense to me, whereas if we were to save, which is why I went through the whole thing about if there's $30,000 that we can put aside to save for the replacement of these turf fields, why not do something versus nothing, and then in 8, 9, or 10 years, we're stuck with this big bill, and it'll be more than $800,000.
Mr. Chairman, if I could. Mary, you brought this up before, and I guess I'm going to repeat what I said before. There's all kinds of assets in town that depreciate over time. And in an ideal world, we'd set reserves for all of them, right? We're redoing the police department across the street right now. I guess if in an ideal world, we could have set aside money every year. We just haven't done that. And honestly, you know, one of my other jobs at the bank is I am the municipal credit officer for the bank. I can tell you other towns don't do this either. The only thing we do it for here is for the property revals.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. I'm not saying it's not. I just am saying that we're picking one particular item, okay, which is the turf fields. And I think if we sat around here long enough, we could think of a whole lot of things in town that this makes great sense for. I guess I'm not, right now anyways, without hearing any more, convinced that this particular item, the turf fields, should rise above all the other things in town that we have, frankly, the exact same problem on.
Fair point both ways.
Well, I don't think a police building is comparable as far as depreciation as a turf field is.
Well,
So
the
I
turf field's gonna last-
disagree with that
Well, I mean,
comparison.
There's no question that a building is going to last longer than a turf field. Of course it is, right? So, I mean, you said something about, you know, bonding. I mean, I think the fire truck we just did, the ladder truck was 7 years, right?
Well, that's a lease to purchase,
We're going to own it in
which I
7
totally
years.
agree with. I think that's a very smart
Okay.
way to purchase such a big truck,
Right.
that expensive truck that depreciates in such a short period of time.
Well, I think the point Tim's making, that's almost comparable to bonding, because we're paying a $1 million
What, the lease
asset
to
for
purchase to the truck is
If you
comparable to
just-
17
if you
to 20
just
years?
look at it, no, it's just like bonding something for 7 years. You're paying interest on it for 7 years.
Right, but I thought the truck, wasn't it was it 4 years or 5 years?
No.
That particular,
4 years?
4 years, so.
Yeah, so I mean, it can go either way, and Tim has a viable point too, that there's a lot of things that if we think about it long enough, and that's something we can discuss at the workshops, when we talk to the Board of Ed. 'Cause
I've
I
spoken
know.
to the Board of Ed about saving
And
for
what do
the
they
turf
say?
field.
They can't, I
Well,
don't think.
I
Yeah,
asked
they
them what
can.
their net surplus was, and they said it was 11,000, but not really, because they still have outstanding bills. So that leads to my question to Ed. Can you tell us the amount of money in rental fees that the town has collected from when the turf fields first began to charge rent?
I don't have any record of that on my side right now.
Did they provide that in their budget
No, they
as a
haven't.
revenue?
They have not reported that to us.
They haven't reported to us. Okay, I did ask the superintendent for that, that number, because I was just curious. But I really don't think it's going to come close to, even if you were to save $100,000 for 8 years, there's just no way. I mean, they're talking, those that are experts, coaches and so forth, said that the rental fees, maybe you'll get 4,000 maybe, but you have to have like Battle of the Bands and all kinds of other activities too to get even that money in. So they're not going to be a money maker or a money generator like had been previously reported by some people. But I don't know, I just think that this is one asset that we know that the $800,000 figure was the price for last year. So now you're going to fast forward 8, 9, or 10 years, it's going to be more than $800,000 to replace it. And I just, if we can do it, which we're a very, fiscally sound town, just because other towns don't save for it doesn't mean that we can't save for them. You know what I'm saying? I just think it just makes sense.
Mary, we have pension obligations for the town, and I don't believe any of our pension plans are 100% funded. We have an OPEB liability we're supposed to be reserving for, which I don't think we've got anything set aside for either, right?
No, we do, a little bit.
Well, it's got to be tiny, right? I mean,
Tiny.
it's got to be nothing, right?
The
So,
goal is
I
to
mean,
get the pensions up to 100% and then
Yeah.
fund.
I just bring them up because, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with your idea, but I bring them up as, I guess if I had $100,000 right now to do something with, this might be the thing I would choose, but I just brought those up because those are two other areas where, well, maybe that's a better spot for it. So I guess I'll let my point rest because we have a difference of opinion on this, obviously, but
We do
We'll
disagree.
continue to consider it, but again, as Rich said, it has to go into workshop sessions as a recommendation to the public, so.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Chairman Katz, Sherwood Drive. About the turf fields, I think the problem will resolve itself in the next 8 to 10 years. They'll be eliminated. Who's going to have the money? And they can't use them now because it's too hot. Several years ago, we had a surplus, and you put the bulk of that into the pension fund. You prepaid some pension fund.
There was a year
Yes.
About 500,000.
Yeah.
And then we discussed surpluses, and you said at that time, you would not, any surplus that we have in the budget, you would direct towards reducing the taxes in the next budget. I mean, I don't want to go back in my CDs and find the meeting, but we're not doing that.
Well, that's what we did.
That's what we
We applied
do.
$1,050,000, and that still maintained the 8%.
Right. So we're already doing it, Sherman.
So you're going to use,
the $1,050,000.
excuse me, you're going to use all of the surplus to reduce our next year's taxes?
No, every year, like the $1,050,000 is being used this year to roll in as revenue out of the surplus fund balance to help mitigate the expenses in this current fiscal year. So we're doing it. That's the
We
way
are.
you do it in municipal government.
Okay, because there was one person in town that always said, when you have a surplus, it's a result of overtaxation.
Wow.
And that's a person's opinion. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. And I go back to what I said earlier. Would you rather be in a situation where you're $8 million in a deficit?
No, I'd rather have the taxes be what they're supposed to be.
So our revenues are coming in greater than expected. We don't fill positions, Sherman, we've talked about this time and time again at Board of Selectmen meetings or Board of Finance. We delayed positions being, and you and I have talked about this also.
Yes, absolutely.
And every week that goes by that we don't replace a position, $200,000, $300,000 annualized potentially, that saves money in the budget.
I just want to make it clear to the public that the surplus has to come from somewhere. It didn't come from God sending it down in an envelope, okay? It came from grants that we
Increased
didn't put
revenue
in,
or-
grants that we didn't figure in our line items for receipts or for overtaxing. It's simple as that.
Okay, we agree.
Okay. On the subject of Yale New Haven Hospital over there that calls ambulances, one experience I had, I went there with a bad cold, very bad cold. And the medical person, after examining me, she says, "I'm going to call an ambulance and send you to the hospital." And I said, "You're not going to send me." And she wanted to argue with me. So I put my doctor on the phone to her, and he said to her, "Do what he says." So they don't always need to send someone to the hospital, especially and there's one case where I know they didn't have to. I saved you money. The roads that we're going to be repairing, I know you said there's this formula for how to figure out the roads. Do they actually look at the roads, or they just figure, here's a formula, and you're paying someone?
We go out. They
You go out and look at the roads?
They go, the engineer and public works,
Okay.
they go out, yes.
That's a good thing. There was one other thing. I get around town quite a bit.
I see you around town a lot. I saw you quite a bit this weekend.
That's my job.
Right.
And I'm noticing in the past 6 months that AMR arrives at the emergency site sometimes before the fire department, sometimes at the same time, and sometimes directly after. So it looks like there's a big improvement in the past 6 months. I also see their vehicles parked down in the Monowese area, in the north end of Washington, over
Divine
the-
Street.
Divine Street. So they are in our town waiting to be called, for what it's worth.
Thank you, Sherman. Anyone else?
Nancy.
I didn't see her before. She's Nancy.
Just be very quick. Nancy Barrett, Crestview Drive. So I'm glad that you clarified the 220 is for the supernumerary program and the 140 is actually for the fire department commission. So thank you for clarifying that. Which actually points up another point. I think a lot of people have difficulty saying supernumerary, so everyone keeps referring to it as the SRO program, but I think it's a really important distinction. The ordinance is the supernumerary ordinance, and there's at least a dozen different differences between a supernumerary and an SRO. I'm sure the police chief views them all as his people, but ultimately it's very different from a compensation standpoint, from just about everything you could imagine. So I think it's a very important distinction. And just one suggestion for the commission that's looking into how to spend this $140,000 for the fire department. I've mentioned this before, so I just thought I'd mention it again. I think particularly in light of the opiate crisis, I think it's really important that we consider having all of our police department employees trained as EMTs. I know I went through EMT training, and my partner was a North Haven police officer, and she's fantastic. And so I would highly recommend
They may be.
that some of them are, but not all of them are.
Not all of them are, you're right.
And so I think particularly if they're going to be first responders showing up and responsible for administering Narcan, I think you need to know what to do next. And so it's not just enough to be able to carry the medication, administer it. I think it's really important to have, at the very least, EMTB training. So that's one suggestion.
I think it's a fair point.
And certainly for our existing fire department, I think we can encourage more of our firefighters who are already trained as EMTs to consider becoming paramedics under Scotty's leadership or whomever, to train them as paramedics. I think that would certainly address a lot of our problems in terms of scheduling and having paramedics available on all of the trucks. And certainly your suggestion of having the paramedic kits on all of the vehicles, I think would go a very long way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Sally?
Thank you for allowing me to speak again. I just wanted to address a couple of things that Mary White had talked about. I don't believe they've collected any rental revenue for the turf yet. I'm on the ad hoc committee to determine the fee schedules, and we still haven't completed our recommendations. We did make some recommendations for some types of users, but I don't think anything has been completely adopted yet by the Board of Ed.
Do they have an estimate as to what they're expecting to receive?
There's different 4 categories of groups of users, whether they're in town, out of town, for profit, not for profit.
Any projection on that?
I think there was one discussion for the first group we did was the out of town. I think it was $175 an hour. Yeah, something like that. But we haven't completed it yet. But I don't think they've collected anything yet.
They have been renting them, so they should be collecting something.
I don't know yet. Okay. All I know is my committee, which I was appointed to by the chairman of the Board of Ed, we have not completed our recommendations to them for what to charge. So
I thought the DOE voted. Remember a vote on that?
it might have. Did they vote on the group 4? Well,
Wait, we're
okay.
getting way
All right,
off.
sorry.
We're getting way off.
Okay, you know what? I'll get you a better answer at the next meeting because we have another meeting coming up on September 25th. But so I tried. And one other thing I wanted to follow up, Mr. Chairman, you had said that the past 8 months or so, AMR is doing a better job having a paramedic on their vehicles when they go to calls here in town.
That's what Scott told us.
Right. So, and that reminded me of a conversation I recently had with a chief in one of the 8 towns that I studied, and he said that their agreement with AMR requires that a paramedic be in the vehicle when it goes on a call in their town. So it's nice that they've been doing it, but it seems more of a voluntary thing. Is there any way that
Once
agreement
I guess the town has
requiring it?
PSR and they subcontract to a vendor, that can be a requirement.
Okay, because then that would address some of the issues that Ms. White raises. And just to quickly make it clear from my comments on my research and other suggestions, I think some of the suggestions that you've prematurely outlined that your committee is going to be coming up with are excellent. And I'm just hopeful that other suggestions like that will come to fruition so that it will not be necessary to hire any further firefighters. I think North Haven's current fire department is very competitive given the size of our town, population of our town, and studying other towns, similar towns, half of them have no paid paramedics or paid firefighters at all. I think we're already competitive, and so hopefully these other ideas and increasing the volunteers will help solve the problem. I just don't think the taxpayers can withstand the type of financial burden that the chief is seeking. So I hope that that was clear from the results of all the research that I had presented, that I believe we have a very competitive fire department as is. And as the first selectman stated very clearly at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, he said that the atmosphere is very positive there, and that they have a very good motivation there, and that and I agree with him that we have fantastic firefighters, and I agreed with the first selectman's assessment of the current standing of the department as far as morale and motivation, and we've got a lot of brand new equipment, so hopefully your recommendations will prevent the hiring of any significant new firefighters. Thank you.
Time will tell. Thank you. Anyone else? Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.